Hey, everybody. It is Thursday, October 16th. You're listening to the Mo News Podcast. I'm Moshe Nunu.
And I'm Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to. On this October 16th, Jill, which I am told, I read here, is National Bosses Day.
Okay, boss. What's on the agenda?
I try my best to be a cool boss, Jill. like the line, I'm not a mom, I'm a cool mom.
No, I'm not a regular mom.
I'm not a regular mom. I'm not a regular boss. I'm a cool boss.
I think every boss thinks they're a cool boss.
That is true.
I think you're a cool boss, but I think every boss thinks they're cool.
Thank you. And it's not just because we're doing this, we're recording this live that you said that. You would say that off camera. Of course,
I say that behind your back too.
Jill, before we get to today's news, we want to give people an early heads up. The forecast has come out from AccuWeather on the snow forecast for this winter. And it appears, this is again just a forecast, and it's hard to forecast out, several months ahead, but they have a pretty good track record at AccuWeather. And it appears, based on their snowfall predictions, that they do see more snow this winter in parts of the Northeast, particularly Philly, New York City, and Boston, than average years. They also predict a snowy winter. Looks like everyone's going to get it. The Midwest, a swath of the plains, the Ohio Valley, areas of Washington, Oregon, and Idaho, and Montana. Basically, everyone in Florida, Joe, it looks like you're going to get snow. And the forecast, definitely on the higher end of the spectrum. Boston, more than last year, but slightly below the average snowfall. Boston, the prediction is 36 to 40 inches over the winter. Your average snowfall is 49 inches. New York City, you'll be getting closer to the average of 29 inches for the winter. They say up to 21 inches. Philly's pretty close to the average. Pittsburgh, slightly below average. Buffalo, you're getting your average snowfall, which is 95 inches a winter. And Chicago, which got half of its average last year, only 17 inches of snow last winter. The average in Chicago is 38 inches. The prediction this year is 32 to 38 inches. It looks like December, the Great Lakes will be hit. So watch out if you're flying to O'Hare Airport. You should always be watching out if you go into O'Hare Airport, but especially this December.
Pack your patience.
Pack your patience and your shovels and your snow blowers and whatever you need. And if you're kids, just pack your sleds. Looks like there'll be some fun sledding too.
By the way, Moshe, I'm okay, even though I sound, I think, half dead right now. I sound a lot worse than I am. That said, Moshe might take over some of my reads if it gets painful.
If at some point in the podcast you only hear my voice, that's because just Jill's lost her voice in this podcast.
I'm here.
Jill, would you like me to do headlines here, or do you want to go ahead and do headlines?
It's National Boss Day. I think you should do it.
Well, as a good boss trying to save your voice for the podcast, I will take over the headlines here. Here's the headlines we're looking at on today's podcast. A major Supreme Court case looking at the role of race when it comes to drawing up congressional districts. A decision here could potentially shake up a number of congressional districts across the country, turning them blue to red. We'll bring you the arguments. Sticking with legal news, today marks day 16 of the government shutdown, and a federal judge, this is the lower court level, is temporarily blocking the president from firing any more federal workers during the government shutdown. We'll tell you why. The Trump administration authorizing covert CIA action in Venezuela. Could U.S. troops be operating in Venezuela? Joe, we'll tell you what President Trump said when he was asked about this, what started in the New York Times. Are you sending the CIA into Venezuela? We'll have a bit of what he said. A follow-up on the story we mentioned earlier this week. Nearly all major media outlets, pretty much all of them except for one, have now rejected the Pentagon's new restrictive press policy, what it might mean for the coverage of the military. A study from Consumer Reports finds an alarming number of protein powders and shakes contain high levels of lead. What you need to know. And we have a couple good news stories to end the pod today, because, we don't bring you enough of those, and we acknowledge that here at Mo News. In one case, how one lottery winner is looking to give back to his community in the areas ravaged by the wildfires in Southern California. And we'll tell you about a remarkable show of sportsmanship from a high school girls basketball team who gave back their title. Jill, this is a level of honesty we are not used to in the year 2025, and so we'll tell you about this great story out of Oklahoma. Plus, as always, I will have on this day in history. All right, Jill has taken a couple drinks of water. Let's go to our lead story.
Okay, starting with a case being heard over at the Supreme Court, it could have a huge impact on the use of race when it comes to redrawing congressional districts and also the 60-year-old Voting Rights Act. On Wednesday, the court heard a legal battle over Louisiana's congressional voting map. At issue is whether state lawmakers' intentional drawing of a second Black majority district in 2024 is a violation of the 14th and 15th Amendments. Last year, Louisiana lawmakers created that newest map to fix a 2022 redistricting map. It only had one Black majority congressional district out of a total of 6 districts in the state. And that map was criticized as diluting the Black vote, given that a third of the population in Louisiana is Black. Now, according to the Voting Rights Act of 1965, it is illegal to redraw congressional maps in a way that dilutes the ability of minorities to elect a candidate of their choice. So in response to that lower court ruling, the state followed the act in drawing a second Black majority district. But lawyers and a group of residents who are not Black sued over that second map with the 2 Black majority districts. They said that the new map was discriminatory. So that is the case that has made its way to the Supreme Court. It is known as Louisiana versus C.I.A. So it's always fascinating to listen to the questions that the justices ask, which tend to give some indication on how they're leaning. All eyes on Justice Kavanaugh. He is a conservative, but he is a potential swing vote. He asked lawyers about time limits when invoking the act, suggesting that the racial dynamics in the country have evolved since 1965.
This court's cases in a variety of contexts have said that race-based remedies are permissible for a period of time, sometimes for a long period of time, decades in some cases, but that they should not be indefinite and should have an endpoint. And what exactly do you think the endpoint should be, or how would we know for the intentional use of race to create districts?
So the lawyer who is representing the Black voters in Louisiana in favor of that new map, they argue that the Voting Rights Act already considers time limits because states need to redraw their maps with a new census every decade. Now, on the other side, you've got 2 of the liberal justices, Elena Kagan and Ketanji Brown Jackson. They challenged a lawyer representing Louisiana voters who are against these race-based districts, asking about whether states can use race as a factor in drawing electoral lines. Kagan and Jackson argued that race can be taken into account because the whole purpose was to fix a previous congressional map that diluted Black Americans' vote. So here's Kagan.
In order to prove a Section 2 violation, you have to show that the current conditions, not some old conditions that happened in 1962 or in 1982, but the current conditions are such that there's no equal opportunity for African American voters or some other group because there's racially blocked voting. There's a there that African Americans can't elect candidates of their choice.
So Moshe, the decision isn't going to come out for a few months, but what is the impact that this could have if it's overturned?
So it really depends on where they go with this, because remember, when it comes to the Supreme Court, they can completely overturn something, they can water down something, they can stand by something, they can suggest, that maybe something needs to be added. There's a whole variety of potential decisions here. Now, interestingly, Jill, this is a pretty rare circumstance we're facing with this case because the court first heard arguments about this case back in March in their previous term. They declined to issue a decision last term. In fact, they said in June they would like it added back to the calendar for re-arguments, for more arguments, without any explanation. But it is a signal, the fact that they heard it in the last term, they brought it back this term, that they might be looking or poised here for a major decision. Now, it was interesting hearing the arguments there from Kavanaugh and then from the liberals. In particular, the liberals pushed back. At one point, Ketanji Brown Jackson compared the predicament for Black voters in Louisiana to disabled Americans. She was talking about the Americans with Disabilities Act, saying they don't have access to certain buildings, so we had to pass the ADA in order to ensure they have access. In this case, the comparison she made was that Black voters in this case are effectively disabled, that they are not being given the same rights as everyone else in the state. As you mentioned, with only one Black majority district out of 6, as opposed to 2 ensures that Well, 2 out of 6 is a third, and a third of the residents in Louisiana are black. So that's viewed as fair as far as the liberals are concerned. Now, as far as the conservatives are concerned here, they've already watered down the Voting Rights Act a bit in previous rulings. And this case just comes a couple years after they struck down affirmative action policies. And that is sort of the theme you heard here in the Kavanaugh clip that we played. He's like, listen, we've made these decisions over time. They're never intended to be permanent, especially if we feel the country has changed. And that was the argument you heard regarding affirmative action. You could go back 20 years. Sandra Day O'Connor, the former justice, had argued with affirmative action. We think the country will be in a place where in the next 20 years or so, we don't need it anymore. And they actually struck it down before 20 years. And so in this case, you have the conservative justices saying, that was passed in 1965. That was a different America. Today, we don't think that might be required. In fact, we think, in their view, what they view as preferential treatment for minority voters is discriminatory itself, that any use of race is discriminatory towards the people who aren't that race. And that's a bit of what you heard around affirmative action. So what are the ramifications here? Well, this is in regards to one specific district. And this second district, a second black majority district, will very likely go blue, go Democrat next year. Now, and you could say based on the arguments and the tone of the arguments yesterday, when the court overturns an aspect of this 2024 map, that flips back to red, right? So that's at least in one case, a blue to red switch as far as, Democratic hopes to retake the House here given the slim majority. But that's not all, because this is not the only district, depending on how they end up ruling here, that has been redrawn in certain states, in particular in the South, where there have been huge issues, we know, related to race for the history of this country, that's been redrawn utilizing or because of the Voting Rights Act. So, we looked at some of the stats here. Republicans could gain up to 12 seats potentially if they completely strike it down and all those states redraw their districts. Jill, the 12 seats there is just one analysis, but it really remains to be seen. There's no firm number, right?
Right. One analyst went on CNN on Wednesday and said that she actually thought that potentially Republicans could gain 19 seats. One stat that I heard that was interesting, back in 1965, there were only 6 members of the House that were black, none from the South. And now there are 27 from the South. Now, of course, it is not just the Voting Rights Act that has changed. So much in this country has changed in the past 8 decades, but just an interesting stat to think about.
Yeah, so there's a lot to watch here. Remember the way the court works. They're not going to issue a ruling tomorrow on this. They're going to discuss it amongst themselves. They're going to figure out what direction to go in. Several of the justices, including Clarence Thomas, are calling for the end to all use of race. We'll see if, the swing votes, which have essentially become at times John Roberts, Brett Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett, where they land on this, because there are a couple of conservatives who want to completely wipe out race altogether. The 3 liberals do not. And so we look at the 3 in the middle. Now they are conservatives, but again, they have been swing votes on certain cases to see where ultimately this decision lands. Jill, before we leave all legal news, there was a major development on the shutdown front. We should know today is shutdown day 16 with no end in sight. But a lower court federal judge yesterday temporarily blocked the Trump administration from laying off further federal workers during the shutdown. They sided with the unions here, who have argued that the dismissals so far have been illegal. We're talking about 4,000 or so firings that have taken place in the last few days. We've told you about the firings at the CDC, of which they retracted several hundred because they said we fired the wrong people. But nonetheless, this lower court judge ruling yesterday that she doesn't believe that the administration has been following the law here. And she raised concerns about these errors the government is making when it comes to what they call the RIFs, the reduction in force actions. And so she's asking for more details from the government. Meanwhile, the government is saying, we have broad authority to do this. I can't believe you're blocking this. So they're going to try to appeal this.
And by the way, on Wednesday, the Senate failed to advance a House-passed short-term spending bill for the 9th time. So Republicans need at least 5 more Democrats in order to break a filibuster. And in the past couple of weeks, they have made no progress in convincing Democrats to vote with them.
Yeah, Democrats standing firm here. They believe they are in the right. They're calling again for Republicans to insert a provision that would ensure that subsidies for people on the Affordable Care Act, millions of Americans on the Affordable Care Act, do not expire at the end of this year. Premiums set to go much higher if the subsidies end, and millions of Americans might no longer be able to afford health care. For Democrats, that is their line in the sand. They aren't moving, but so far, Republicans are not moving either.
Okay, the Trump administration has authorized the CIA to take covert action in Venezuela as part of its efforts to increase pressure on the country's dictator, Nicolas Maduro. Under the new authorities, the CIA would be empowered to take action against Maduro or his government, either directly or as part of a broader military operation. Now, this was a story first broken by the New York Times on Wednesday. The CIA would be able to carry out lethal operations in Venezuela and conduct a range of operations in the Caribbean. Unclear whether the CIA is actively planning operations in Venezuela or whether the authorities have been granted as some type of contingency. President Trump effectively confirming the story as he took questions in the Oval Office yesterday.
I authorized for two reasons, really. Number one, they have emptied their prisons into the United States of America. They came in through the they came in through the border. They came in because we had an open border policy. And the other thing are drugs. We have a lot of drugs coming in from Venezuela. And a lot of the Venezuelan drugs come in through the sea, so you get to see that. But we're going to stop them by land also.
The U.S. has already conducted military strikes on about a dozen boats in the southern Caribbean since the start of September. He says the vessels were transporting drugs to the United States. These strikes have added to tension with Maduro, and they prompted speculation that the U.S. could be preparing to attack Venezuela on land.
Yeah, Trump was asked about that yesterday, too, and he said, we're looking at the land. We're looking at doing something on the land. So we'll see what comes of it, especially as you talked about those strikes on the sea. The U.S. has provided no evidence besides, some videos saying those are drug boats. We're getting those drug boats out at sea. What impact it's having, unclear, but the vast majority of drug traffic actually comes via the Pacific, not via the Caribbean. Nonetheless, there has been a huge buildup of the U.S. military in the Caribbean. There are now 10,000 U.S. troops, mostly based in Puerto Rico right now, but also a contingent of Marines on amphibious assault ships. In all, the Navy now has 8 surface warships and a submarine in the Caribbean. And the Trump administration is viewing drug trafficking as now what they deem narco-terrorism. They've asserted in legal filings that Maduro operates a criminal gang, a trend to Aragua. Now, the assessment from U.S. intel agencies contradicts parts of that conclusion. Nonetheless, it appears the truth is somewhere in the middle in terms of Maduro's role or support for Tren de Aragua and the drug trade, not as big as the administration is saying based on intel assessments, but nothing at all at the same time. Trump has told Congress that he decided the U.S. is now in an armed conflict with drug cartels on par with terror groups in the Middle East. He has now deemed them terrorist organizations, which is why they're now taking this more military tack when it comes to dealing with the drug trade, not just trying to interdict them on the high seas, arrest them, put them on trial, but treat them the same way the U.S. has been treating for decades terror groups in the Middle East, especially as you look at the numbers annually, the tens of thousands of Americans who die due to drugs. The conflict here with Maduro goes back a while here, and Trump has grown frustrated with diplomacy with Venezuela, which he has tried in the past. Sort of like what we saw with Iran. At some point, he tried diplomacy, but he grew, very frustrated with Venezuelan leader failing to concede to U.S. demands that he give up power voluntarily. And he continues to insist that he has no part in drug trafficking, and the U.S. apparently does have intelligence and reason to believe that he is involved in it. Remember, we told you about the Nobel Peace Prize winner. She won it partially due to her protests against Maduro. She was banned from running against him last year. The opposition party, of which she was a leader of, was actually elected democratically to lead Venezuela. Maduro refused to give up power. He blocked them from getting into power. And that's among the issues we have here. So we will see what happens as the U.S. continues to escalate things, not just on sea, but apparently on land here. But Jill, before we leave this story, what we try to do here at Mo News is give you historical context. And so when you hear things like the CIA is getting involved in covert action in Venezuela and South America, some of you might say, well, that sounds familiar. I feel like we've done that in the past. And for those of you who just said that, you're right. So sort of like the LL Cool J song, Mama Said Knock You Out, If some of you remember how that song begins, Jill, remember the first few lyrics of that song?
I don't even know where you're going with this.
So LL Cool J, famously from the early 90s, has a song, Mama Said Knock You Out. And it begins with, don't call it a comeback. I've been here for years.
Oh, right.
Yes. So the CIA, not unlike LL Cool J and Mama Said Knock You Out, don't call it a comeback. It's been in Latin America for years. So here's your quick history of the CIA in Latin America. Back in 1954, the CIA orchestrated a coup that overthrew the president of Guatemala. That didn't work out very well. The CIA backed a Bay of Pigs invasion in Cuba. You may have heard about this one. That ended in disaster. The CIA tried for years to assassinate Fidel Castro. That didn't work out. In the 60s, the CIA also supplied weapons to dissidents in the Dominican Republic to assassinate the leader, the authoritarian leader they had in the Dominican. That led to, well, we could say issues for a while. The CIA also had its hands in a 1964 coup in Brazil, a 1973 coup in Chile, the death of Che Guevara, shenanigans in Bolivia, the Contra fight that left the Sandinista government in Nicaragua in the 80s. Joe, I could go on here. I'm missing a few countries in the mix, but the whole point is CIA, if you look at their track record here, it's sort of like the 1990 Chicago Cubs. It wasn't very good, like really bad. So we don't know how this is going to work out in Venezuela, what exactly they're doing here. But if you look at the past 70 years of the CIA in South and Latin America, what's the opposite of Larry David? Not pretty good. The opposite.
Pretty bad.
Bad.
I was actually thinking, though, I assume the CIA is operating everywhere. We just don't know about it.
That's true. What I just listed are all the things that have gradually become declassified over time, because the CIA at some point was like, okay, you thought we were involved in a bunch of, we were, yeah, we
you were right.
Did a bunch of things. We did. And actually there was a declaration by Gerald Ford when he became president in the 1970s. We're done with the whole assassination coup thing for a while. Like, it has not worked out these past 20, 30 years. And that was just Latin America. I could get into Africa. I could get into the Middle East. The reason why we have the Ayatollah in Iran these days, partially due to a CIA-backed coup in the 1950s, which we've discussed before. So anyway, I wish the CIA luck in their endeavor, but there's a lot of lessons to be learned in the past few decades.
Okay, time for the speed read from the Mo News Substack. Major news outlets handed over their Pentagon press passes on Wednesday after a new restrictive media policy took effect Tuesday evening. ABC, NBC, CBS, The Washington Post, The New York Times, The Wall Street Journal, The Associated Press, Newsmax, The Washington Times, and dozens more refused to sign a pledge introduced by the Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth last month. It says that the media cannot obtain or use any unapproved or unauthorized material, even if the info is unclassified. Interestingly, we were waiting to see what Fox News was going to decide. Fox News is where Hegseth formerly worked, and that network also refusing to sign. Only the far-right outlet One America News has agreed to comply. And this is an interesting exchange. Retired four-star General Jack Keane and Fox News anchor Bret Baier, who has covered the Pentagon for years with Fox, blasting those new media restrictions, calling them a threat to press freedom.
What they're really doing, they want to spoon-feed information to the journalists, and that will be their story. That's not journalism. Journalism is going out and finding the story and getting all the facts to support it. And no one's going to walk in and bang on a door of a four-star general or senior civilian policy leader in the Pentagon. I never had that, but I did have journalists chasing a story of something that was going on in the Army, and those things were legitimate. And if anything, what would frustrate us in times is we didn't beat you to it. And something bad is happening, and we're getting our act together to do it. And sometimes, let's wait a couple of days before we talk about that, and you guys are on it. And that's journalism.
So pretty interesting coming from Hegseth's old network, Moshe.
It is, Jill. I mean, he's had a back and forth, actually, with their Pentagon correspondent, Jennifer Griffin, who's a friend. I worked with her during my time at Fox News back in the early 2000s. And, she is as straight a shooter as is possible. And Hegseth has been attacking her. So Hegseth, despite having come from Fox, there have been conflicts between him and Fox. And it was interesting, actually, when I was back in my Fox News days in the mid 2000s, Iraq War was happening, etc. That's when Bayer, before he became an anchor, was the Pentagon correspondent. So he can speak with a lot of expertise about what is possible, what is not possible. You've heard Hegseth characterize this as common sense, saying journalists do not identify themselves. They need to wear passes. They already do wear passes. They already don't go to classified areas. Ultimately, Jill, you've been to the Pentagon as well. There's like a cafeteria there. The Pentagon is basically like a small city. There's a CVS, there's a post office, there are multiple cafeterias. The cafeteria is like where you meet people, right? And where you learn stuff. And these organizations are, pretty good about when they learn things and it potentially could risk American troops, talking to Pentagon officials about that. Now, this policy is tantamount to creating a press corps at the Pentagon that is sort of like, what you see in Russia or China, like taking their press releases and putting them out. You can't even, according to this policy, print information that is unclassified if it hasn't been approved by the Pentagon. So that is way beyond what we see at any other department in the U.S. That's beyond what we see at the White House as well. So it's going to be interesting to see how this unfolds here and whether Hegseth relents and whether there's any sort of negotiation here moving forward or whether he stands by this. Now, keep in mind here that Hegseth is already running one of the least transparent Pentagons that we've seen in modern history. They've only held 6 briefings since January. This is a stark contrast where you might have had multiple briefings on camera every week, or at least one once a week. But 6, basically not even once a month are they holding a briefing right now. And it comes as the world's a busy place and the U.S. military is involved in a lot of places. He's been restricting a lot of things. He's been going after the media. He kicked out a bunch of media out of their TV booths. He resents the way the media covered his confirmation hearings and the various revelations of him going into the confirmation hearings. So, he's been on the attack here when it comes to the media for a while. And, there's been adversarial relationships in the past. You go back to like Robert McNamara, the Secretary of Defense, and Kennedy, Don Rumsfeld under Bush, but nothing like this. And that's what was so interesting listening to that Jack Keane exchange, the former 4-star general who was on Fox, who's like, listen, at the end of the day, you have a job, I have a job. I respect the media. And if you look over time, media coverage of the Pentagon has uncovered mistakes that eventually led to reforms. And by the way, those are mistakes that have led to people dying, right? And when I talk about mistakes, I'm talking about potentially accidental things, but some things that were total scandals, some things were total cover-ups. The Pentagon Papers basically discovered that the administration knew they were lying to the American people about Vietnam. So that reporting, critical. The Pentagon spends about $1 trillion a year of our taxpayer money. And that's one of the reasons why we have a lot of reporters there. At CBS, we had a reporter there. When I was at Bloomberg, we had a reporter there. At Fox News, we had a reporter there because the Pentagon is engaged in a lot of life or death decisions, literally, that impact us around the world.
From Fox News, the State Department has revoked the visas of at least 6 foreign nationals accused of celebrating the assassination of conservative activist Charlie Kirk. The State Department posted screenshots of social media comments by people from Argentina, Germany, and Brazil, saying that those who, quote, wish death on Americans are not welcome in the U.S. The posts included, quote, when fascists die, Democrats don't complain. Another said that Kirk, quote, devoted his entire life to spreading racist, xenophobic, misogynistic rhetoric and alluded to him being in hell. Now, officials are not identifying these visa holders or specifying the types of visas that they had, but it comes amid growing scrutiny over free speech following Kirk's killing. All people in the United States, from citizens to undocumented migrants, historically have been protected by the First Amendment's 5 freedoms: religion, speech, press, assembly, and petition. And that's because the Constitution doesn't refer to citizens, but simply people.
Yeah, in fact, there was an interesting quote that we found from former very conservative Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia, who said in a 2014 interview, I think anyone who's present in the U.S. has protections under the U.S. Constitution, implying even folks here illegally. Significant words there from Scalia, but at the same time, we should note the courts have ruled that those rights can be limited if the government deems speech to pose a national security or immigration risk. The State Department and the federal government have been given wide discretion when it comes to visa issuance and revocation. and has recently, we've been telling you about them, canceling visas for individuals accused of promoting hate speech, inciting violence, and supporting terrorist organizations. So it's an interesting constitutional argument. Jill, I messaged several folks who I trust on these matters who've covered the Supreme Court and federal law for years. And they say, there is this sort of debatable ground here, and there could be an interesting Supreme Court case because, yes, freedom of speech for everyone who is present here. At the same time, latitude to the State Department to determine what to do with visas and who's allowed in this country. So if these people were all U.S. citizens, they can say whatever they want about Charlie Kirk. You enter precarious territory suddenly when you're here under the auspices of a visa issued by the State Department. Especially, by the way, if you're on a visa, you're looking to get a green card, they can scrutinize everything, and they've been doing that of late when it comes to social media. In fact, if you're even a tourist looking to come to the U.S. now, the government is looking at your social media, allegedly. So, you hear the argument here, Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, saying, if you're here on a visa and cheering on the public assassination of a political figure, prepare to be deported. You are not welcome in the country. Now, I did see some action on social media over the last 48 hours. Clearly, some legal cases are being prepared here. So do any of these six try to question this? And does it go to the Supreme Court? I mean, Jill, it's sort of the theme of this podcast. Will this one go to the Supreme Court? Will that one go to the Supreme Court? Well, that one, because, you do have an administration here who is very much testing the limits of the law. So we will watch for that. In the meantime, those six people have lost their visas.
Okay, a story that I don't think will end up at the Supreme Court, but I guess you never know. This from Consumer Reports. Protein powders are carrying troubling levels of toxic metals, according to a new Consumer Reports investigation. So the organization tested 23 protein powders and ready-to-drink shakes from popular brands, and they found that heavy metal contamination is even more common among protein products than when they tested over a decade ago. And this is raising concerns that the risks are growing right alongside the industry itself, which has really taken off. For more than 2/3 of the products that they analyzed, a single serving contained more lead than Consumer Reports food safety experts say is safe to consume in a day, some by more than 10 times. So this time around, in addition to the average level of lead being higher than what they found 15 years ago, there were also fewer products that had undetectable amounts. And this is important because unlike prescriptions and over-the-counter drugs, the FDA doesn't review, approve, or test supplements like protein powders before they're sold. And federal regulations also don't generally require supplement makers to prove that their products are safe. There's no federal limits for the amount of heavy metals that they can contain.
Yeah, and keep in mind that if you test almost anything these days, you will find a certain amount of lead. It's in our soil, so you'll see it in produce. Now, at the same time, 2 of the plant-based protein powders contained enough lead that Consumer Reports experts advised against consuming them. They are Naked Nutrition's Mass Gainer and Huel's Black Edition powder. Now, we should note that James Clark, the chief marketing officer for Naked Nutrition, wrote in a statement that the company has commissioned an independent test in response to these findings and that it, quote, confirmed that no heavy metals exceeded FDA reference intake levels. So that's something to keep in mind here. There's lead. Don't freak out completely here, because the question is how much and how often are you taking it? Now, in most cases, Consumer Reports says there is no reason to panic here if you've been using any of the products they tested. We have a link in the show notes if you want to see if your go-to product is listed here. Many of these powders are fine to have occasionally, and even those with the highest lead levels are far below the concentration needed to cause immediate harm. One concern, though, is for pregnant women and the ingesting these protein powders and the potential impact they can have here. But again, this is sort of a murky area here, which, Jill, you noted, these are not like prescription or over-the-counter drugs. The FDA doesn't review, approve, or test supplements here. There's even sort of the lack of guidelines. Nonetheless, it is something to keep in mind here, especially as we're in this like protein craze right now. And we should note Consumer Reports is an independent nonprofit, pretty much a gold standard when it comes to testing. And we have linked up with them here at Mo News. And if you're interested in getting their studies, it's not just protein powders. They test everything: electronics, bicycles, a whole variety of consumer products related to babies and kids, pretty much almost anything in your home, vehicle, or workplace. You can check out Consumer Reports, an annual subscription. Their app is extremely helpful over at consumerreports.org/Mo News. Again, that's consumerreports.org/Mo News. We're offering you 25% off, just $29 for the year. That's just about $2 a month to get access to all their tests.
Okay, two good news stories to end the podcast. From the LA Times, in Altadena, California, a community still scarred by January's devastating Eaton fire, a familiar face is leading an unlikely rebuilding effort. His name is Edwin Castro. You might remember him as the man who won that record $2 billion Powerball jackpot in 2022. Now he is one of the biggest landowners in his hometown. He bought 15 scorched lots for about $10 million. He says it's not about speculation, but restoration. He is buying up the lots and rebuilding homes for families that want to move back in. The 33-year-old wants to sell the rebuilt homes to families who plan to settle there, not investors who are looking to rent or flip them for higher prices.
Now, at the same time, not everyone's convinced that this is totally altruistic. Some locals see his effort as part of a larger wave of outside investors snapping up burned lots. They call it a second disaster for the community that's already lost so much. Keep in mind, 9,000 structures were destroyed in the community, wiping out generations of, particularly in certain areas, their Black home ownership. And there is a fear here of gentrification. At the same time, a lot of people are saying, I'd rather Castro do it. He has good intentions, as opposed to some of these kind of large firms, financial firms coming in and buying up lots and selling them at the highest possible prices. Castro was born and raised there. He's the son of a construction worker. He says he wants to honor his father's legacy and rebuild the kind of tight-knit neighborhoods that he remembers. He said in an interview, quote, "I want to feel like the old neighborhood, like if you put all those houses pre-fire in a time bubble." Now, this is a multi-year, some would say a decade-long effort to rebuild the community following those disastrous fires earlier this year.
And my favorite story of the day from CBS News, a high school girls basketball team in Oklahoma returned a championship title when they discovered that they actually lost the game. And of course, the internet is praising this team for its really good sportsmanship. The Academy of Classical Christian Studies played Apache High School last year. The game ended in an exciting buzzer beater, 44-43, Academy winning the team's first championship title. But the head coach, Brandon King, felt like something was off, given that there was some confusion with the scoreboard earlier in the game. He told CBS, "As soon as I walked out of the locker room, my stomach kind of turned into knots. And I said, I'm going to need to know if we really won this game or not." So he went home, he rewatched the game tape, and he marked down each point, and he realized that the real score was actually 43-42, with the other team, Apache, winning instead.
Imagine that. You win the championship and you rewatch the film and you realize that the score was off, and then you announce publicly, I know it was good to win, but guys, we didn't really win, and we're going to return the trophy and the title. And it turns out that the Academy would have been allowed to keep the title even with the scoring issue. The Oklahoma Secondary School Activities Association rules state that scores are final and cannot be changed once a game is over, even if there were mistakes in there. But the Academy team unanimously decided to appeal their own win. They said, no, we actually lost. We need to give up this title. Pretty unprecedented move here. One of the players saying, "It would have felt wrong, I think, to have taken the trophy regardless." The appeal was granted by the state, and then they hand-delivered the championship plaque to the Apache team, whose coach, her name is Amy Merriweather, said, "It showed us there are still good people in this world."
Moshe, a great lesson all around, and pretty incredible that there was a scoreboard mix-up and that he didn't really figure it out until after the game.
And the fact that they won by a point, and he's like, something's off. And literally the score was off by 2 points. Obviously significant when you win by 1 point, but nonetheless, a fascinating story, rare this day and age. So we want to bring you a couple positive stories as we head into On This Day in History here. On this day in 1964, China successfully detonates its first atomic bomb. They followed in previous years, of course, the U.S., which got the atom bomb first, Soviet Union. Still today, only a few countries have nuclear weapons. We're talking, again, the aforementioned U.S., Russia, U.K., France, China, North Korea, Pakistan, and India. Also, the Israelis, who don't admit to having nuclear bombs, but are pretty much assumed to have nuclear weapons going back a number of decades. So significant day here as China got the bomb. On this day in 1968, during the awards ceremony for the 200-meter race of the Mexico City Summer Olympic Games, which took place that year, American sprinters Tommy Smith and John Carlos gave the famous Black Power salute. You might know this iconic image of them doing the salute in the air from the awards platform. They were later ordered to leave the games after getting political on the awards platform. It was just months after the MLK assassination. They wanted to protest racism in the U.S. At the time, their action was met with boos. The American media went after them at the time. They were, again, expelled from the Olympic Games. Eventually, though, they would be praised for that action and their courage. On this day in 1978, John Paul II becomes the first non-Italian pope in more than 450 years. Of course, John Paul II, many of us grew up with. He was the pope until 2005. On this day in pop culture history, 1976, Songs in the Key of Life hits number 1. Jill, Songs in the Key of Life, incredible album by Stevie Wonder. Isn't She Lovely? Sir Duke, classic listen.
And given the state of my voice at the moment, I am definitely not going to sing it.
There will be no singing.
There will be no
podcast.
singing.
Even though our next song, it's hard not to sing it. But on this day in 1982, Dolly Parton's version of I Will Always Love You attains commercial success, reaching number 1 on the Billboard charts for a second time. It actually had reached number 1 back in 1974. Then on this day in history, 43 years ago in 1982, she re-records it. Now, of course, there's the Dolly Parton version. There's also the Whitney Houston version of I Will Always Love You. So this song has hit number 1, multiple artists, multiple years.
All right, I did it. I made it through the podcast. Thank you all for listening to the Mo News Podcast. If you like what you hear, please share this with your friends. It will help us grow. Follow us, subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and review us kindly in the App Store.
Jill, go get some tea with some honey. Tell your kids, tell your husband, Mom cannot speak for the next 24 hours. And we'll hear you loud and clear for the Friday edition of the podcast.
I hope so.
Again, this